Hello, everybody. I'm Robin, and these are my reflections. And today we're going to do the books I read in June. It's going to be a quick video because I only read two nonfiction books this month. I was doing a readathon. I read mostly fiction for that. And then next month might be the same. I'm not sure. We'll see. I'm doing the tarot readathon in July. And if you haven't heard of tarot readathon, you should definitely go check it out. If you like readathons, and you like tarot, which I'm assuming if you're watching my channel, you do, you might enjoy this. If you're interested in a readathon for July, this is fun. I've done it. This will be my third year doing it now. You pull tarot cards. There are prompts that go with the cards. I don't know what I'll be reading because I haven't pulled the cards. I like to pull as I go. And you have to match the books to the prompts. So we'll see what comes up for next month. But for this month, I want to share the two nonfiction books that I read. One was a quickie, the other one was a doozy. And we're going to go through them very quickly. So the first book I read on my Kindle. I don't have the physical novel here, but it was called Jamie Helps Mel Write a Novel. This was 7 conversations about writing a book and some things you want to try by Jamie Morris with Melissa Joe Hill. So this was a short book, but very inspirational. And if you are a writer and you're feeling a little blocked, or if you've ever thought about writing but you're feeling a little nervous, this might be a good book to read because this was 7 conversations between a writer and her writing coach, and they talked about inspiration, they talked about blockages, they talked about confidence. They had 7 different conversations, and with each conversation, at the end of the conversation, there because they transcribed the conversations in the book, and then after that, there were activities that you could practice on your own to help get you unlocked, to help shake things loose, to help inspire your creativity. There were even suggested movies to watch, suggested books to read. In just 60 or so pages, there was a lot of inspiration packed into this little book. So let's take a look. Okay, so here's the table of contents. So there's the intro, and then there are 7 conversations. Am I even a writer? Does writing practice makes perfect? And it tells you why we're doing this. So does writing practice make perfect? To explore writing practice lab. Come as you are to explore novel vision board. Writer's block to explore keys to unblock. And then you have literary stage fright, main character energy, how to thicken your plot, an inconclusive conclusion, and then about the authors and some resources. So I'm just going to read the intro to you so that you can get a feel for what's inside the book. And it says, this book began when 2 folks, me, Jamie Morris, the writing coach, and Melissa Joe Hill, creative human, poking around in Mel's long-held desire to write a novel and in her equally long-held frustration that somehow she hadn't gotten past chapter 3 in any of the great story ideas stuck on her laptop. I wanted to help if I could, so Mel and I decided to start a podcast, record our real conversations about writing, and see where we ended up. Well, here we are. So in the book, you find conversations, which are the podcast transcripts that the conversations that they had, divided into 7 short sections. And they include topics as personal and process oriented as writer's block and literary stage fright, and as practical and crafty as plot points and character arc. Then you have a to explore section, and at the end of all of the sections, you find one or more to explore activities. And they're not, she says, consider these not as homework, but as an invitation to enter the conversation and follow the themes further. And then you have resources for writers. So if you like a good resource list, we've got one for you. Every book, film, and deck mentioned, along with additional gems, appear at the end of the book. So let's take a look at one of these chapters. Here's the Does Practice Make Perfect? It always starts with a quote. Here it says, if you want to know the shape of a snake, put it in a box, unknown. And then the conversation. So Mel says, so if you suspect you're a writer, how do you begin? Like, what does a writing practice look like? And the reason I struggle with this is because I'm a musician. And in my head, at least, there's a difference between practicing scales or riffs or whatever versus playing a song. So, what is a writing practice? And then Jamie goes on to explain what she thinks that is. I guess there are probably as many writing practices as there are people. Some writers have daily practices like journaling or morning pages, just more free flowing ways of regularly capturing their thoughts and feelings. On the other hand, and much more project oriented, some writers, novelists in particular, swear by their book Bibles. And for them, keeping a running log of characters and ideas and settings for their work in progress can be a part of their writing practice. And then she goes on to talk a little bit about Julia Cameron's morning pages, and more about other practices that other famous writers who've written books on writing have and have suggested for people to have, and how they could work for some people and not work for others. Then in this Explore Writing Lab, she brings in the tarot here, where she says in tarot, the card known as the Hierophant represents tradition, structure, and discipline. While these attributes can create a helpful framework for our writing, they might also drag us toward rigidity and dogma. Consider your current writing practice, if you have one. Does it support your creativity or does it weigh you down? How could you adjust your routine to find more freedom or discipline as you need? And then if you don't have a practice, then here's a plate full of possibilities for you to try. And then she gives some examples of writing practices for people to try. Morning pages, that's Julia Cameron's idea. And then she credits her there and talks about how to do it. Then the timed free writing from Natalie Goldberg and how to do that. A writer's Bible, and then field notes. And she gives a bunch of different ideas of ways to have a sustainable writing practice. In the More to Explore section at the end of each chapter, there's often a book to read or a film to watch that covers what they've talked about in that chapter. And all of the chapters are laid out exactly like that. You have the conversation, then you have a practice or a few practices in this case, and then the More to Explore section. There's a little bit of tarot woven in there, a little bit of journaling, a little bit of introspection. It was perfect for my style, and it really inspired me. So I really wanted to share this one. So again, this one is called Jamie Helps Mel Write a Novel. Okay, so the final book that I read this month is this tome of a book. This thing is huge. I don't know if you can tell how big it is, but it's huge. And this is The Tarot for the Soul, a collection of therapeutic activities by Drea Bloom. Now, I have reviewed quite a few of Drea Bloom's journals and books over the years, and I will put some of them in the description box below if you're interested in seeing some of the others. But if I forget, they're all located in my book reflections playlist. You can find them all in there. But this is the newest one, and this is actually an abridged version of the larger two-part book series that she has. What is it called? Let me see if I can find it. Okay, so she has the two-part book series called The Clinical Use of Tarot Card Imagery in Psychotherapy, because Drea is a psychotherapist. So she has created a two-part book series on psychotherapy and tarot and how you can use the imagery to help and, in practice. This book is just the practice. So it's taken out all of the psychotherapy research, and there's a little bit of it in here. There's a little bit of intro to each section, but it's mostly the practice, and it's almost like lesson plans or I don't know. I mean, because I was a teacher, so that's kind of what I liken it to. I don't know. You could call them workshops. I don't know what you want to call them. She calls them activities. So there are activities that you can do using the tarot cards to address all of these different themes. And the themes that you find in the book, hang on, let me just find the table of contents. So grateful for this table of contents because it really helps you be able to find what you're looking for and then turn right to it, because this book is like 500 and change pages. Okay, so the themes that she's covering in this one are pataphysics, tarot as a projective tool, archetype exploration, active imagination, shadow work, hero's journey, divergent thinking, narrative therapy, psychodrama, EMDR inspired activities, inner critic work, introjection, parts work, chair work, Gestalt and polarities, Gestalt and the fertile void, solution focused therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy focuses on values, imagogenogram or imagogenogram, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that, sand play or sand tray, poetry therapy, asemic writing for healing, therapeutic prompts and activities, activities for special issues, and then ending therapy. As in the beginning of all of Drea's books, you always have these wonderful quotes. I love quotes, but this book is a little bit different from the others in that we don't have a lot of quotes kind of papered throughout. There's not a lot of pictures. This is a lot of writing and a lot of words. In the sections on writing, there is some space to write, but for the most part, you've got a lot of like instruction, and it's basically activity plans on activities. It even gives you the words to say if you're using this for a client. And I think that, there's just a lot of information being poured out here for us to read. So let's just read the introduction and then we'll read one of the sections. We'll go through one so that you can kind of see how it's laid out. So it says, what you have before you is an abridged version of my 2-volume book, The Clinical Use of the Tarot Card Imagery in Psychotherapy. That text has a great deal of theoretical material, whereas in this one, I cut all of that out, leaving only the activities. I figured that doing so would make accessing this information on a day to day basis easier for clinicians. Now, let me stop there. There is a little bit of information, a little bit of theory in this book at the beginning of each section. It's not a lot, but it's a little bit for someone like me who's not a psychotherapist to kind of understand what we're doing here and why this is a good practice to kind of join with your tarot cards. So she does give that at the beginning of each section. So it says, while my official audience is other therapists, my hope is that anyone who uses tarot for self growth will be inspired by what they find here. The metaphoric nature of the cards makes them evocative, provocative, multidimensional tools for addressing all manner of mental health issues. Indeed, we are only limited by our imagination when it comes to creating new ways of combining tarot with methods of healing and personal development. It is important to me that the psychological aspects of tarot be accessible to anyone who works in the helping professions, to anyone who wants to deepen their relationship with the cards, to anyone who wants to get to know themselves better, to anyone who wants to become the best possible version of themselves. I want to spread the word because I love tarot. It's magic in that the cards provide us with an excuse to connect with spontaneity, synchronicity, mystery, intuitive knowledge, and the visual, symbolic, archetypal power of art. Using tarot leads to conversations with ourselves we didn't know we needed to have. For even though we already know the answers, they're buried under fear, under shame, under trauma, under convenience. The beauty is that tarot pulls the truth quickly to the surface. Tarot allows for instantaneous communication from the soul to the conscious mind. Sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's like a kick in the head. Either way, my desire is for you, my dear reader, to have opportunities for seeing things in new ways, for rewriting stories, for having epiphanies, for tending to your soul and allowing your soul to tend to you, for connecting with your creative side, your healing side, your witchy side, the side of you that yearns to play seriously. And then it goes into the chapters. I mean, you can see it's like right in there. There's no pictures or anything. So let's read one of them. Let's do the inner critic work. I think it was on page 209. Let's look at that one. So introduction is here. It starts on page 209 and it goes to page 213. So it's very short. The theory around it all, there's not a lot. There's just a little bit of writing, but it's enough for someone like me to understand what is this work and why are we using tarot to do it, basically. So it says inner critic work and parts work are deeply interconnected in psychology, as both addresses internal dynamics by recognizing and working with distinct aspects of the self. In this chapter, we will focus specifically on the inner critic, leaving parts work for later in the book. In both cases, tarot cards represent a creative way to give material from to give material form to these dimensions of ourselves. As I will demonstrate below, using visual imagery to represent specific parts allows clients to be in relationship with those parts in a way that is difficult to do so solely depending on one's imagination. This is especially useful for clients who have a difficult time with visualization. And then she goes on to talk a little bit more about inner critics and what it is, and that it represents the self-critical part of yourself. What does parts work? How does it work together? But then it talks a little bit about the inner advocate. And then it says in parts work, the inner advocate is that part of the client that serves to protect the client from the emotional damage that the inner critic can cause. And it is the compassionate, supportive, and empowering inner voice that counterbalances the inner critic, expressing encouragement, self acceptance, and wisdom, often molded after nurturing figures or a person's own deep sense of self worth. Here's an example of a dialogue between the inner critic and the inner advocate. And then there's that dialogue there. So then it goes into, why are we doing this with tarot? Like, why tarot? Why use tarot to do this? And it says, as we know, the evocative imagery on tarot cards serves as a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious mind, making abstract concepts like self criticism and self compassion more tangible. When a client pulls a card that resonates with the inner critic, they may notice emotions, memories, or past experiences surfacing, revealing the origins of their negative self talk. This process can provide deeper insight into where these inner voices come from and why they persist. On the other hand, identifying the inner advocate card can help clients access strengths and qualities they may not have fully recognized in themselves. The tarot acts as a mirror, allowing clients to explore their inner world in a creative and intuitive way as it stimulates their right brain energy. And then it goes through some more about why, and then it gives you some warm-ups. In order to warm up your client before doing inner critic work with the cards, you can ask them some of the following questions, and it gives you specific questions to ask. What does your inner critic say to you most often? What does your inner critic believe is protecting you from? If your inner critic had a physical form, what would it look like? How has your inner critic helped you in the past, even in a manipulative way? How can you develop an internal voice that is more kind and nurturing? What compassionate response can I offer to my inner critic? Or could you offer to your inner critic? And what actions can you take to reinforce a more balanced, compassionate inner dialogue in daily life? Of course, you're not going to ask all of those questions, but as in all of Drea's books, there are many options for you to choose from, and you can go with whatever is jumping out to you. Usually, what I do is I just read through it, all of them, and whatever really feels like I have an answer for, that's the one I'll answer. Or if it feels like I'm pushing at it, like I don't want to answer it, I might dig in and do that one, right? So I just kind of go with my intuition on it. There's lots of questions always. So you can kind of choose what you feel, or you can start at the beginning and then work your way through, you know? But it's going to take a long time. It's not going to be something you're going to be able to answer all those questions in one sitting, I don't think, anyway. And then we get into the first lesson here, or the first activity. I keep saying lesson because I'm thinking like lesson plans because I used to be a teacher. So it says meeting the inner critic and the inner advocate. And then it tells you your purpose to help clients externalize and engage with their inner critic and inner advocate, fostering self awareness, self compassion, and cognitive restructuring. By giving these internal voices form through tarot imagery, clients can separate themselves from harsh self judgments and access a more balanced, self supportive perspective. It tells you the materials that you need. There's not a lot here: a tarot deck or an oracle deck, a journal or a notepad for reflections, two chairs or cushions, optional for role playing, and then markers and paper for drawing or summarizing key insights. So if you're doing this with yourself, you may not want to use those two chairs, or you could if you feel you want to do the jumping back and forth. It's up to you. Um, and then it says grounding and preparation, step one. And it tells you exactly what to do. Before selecting the cards, guide the client through a brief somatic check in to increase self awareness and regulation. So now I'm doing this with myself. So I'm going to guide myself through something that I like to do to check in with myself and regulate my body. It gives you some ideas here. Close your eyes. If some ideas to say to your client if you're using this for a client. So you can say, close your eyes if you'd like, and take 3 deep breaths. Notice how you're feeling in your body. Where do you carry tension when you think about self-criticism? Now imagine that within you there are multiple voices, one that is critical and one that is encouraging. Today we're going to give them space to speak. Of course, you're going to pause in between that. I'm not going to read it as fast as I did, right? So then it says, step two, identifying the inner critic. Invite the client to deliberately choose a tarot card that embodies the voice of their inner critic. And then it gives you some prompts to use, some things to actually say out loud to your client to get them to choose that card. So you may say, choose which card in this deck reminds you of the way you criticize yourself. Or you may say, does any inner image or symbol or character here feel like it carries judgment, pressure, or negativity? There are some reflection questions to ask. What do you notice in this image that reminds you of your inner critic? If this card had a voice, what tone would it use? What words or phrases would it say? Where do you feel this criticism in your body when it speaks? And then it says to encourage the client to name their inner critic, as this can help externalize it further. Then step 3 is identifying the inner advocate. So you're going to do the same thing. You're going to ask them with these prompt selections to choose a card that represents their inner advocate, the voice of wisdom and encouragement and self-compassion. You're going to ask them one of these 2 questions. Which card makes you feel safe, supported, or guided? Or who or what in this deck reminds you of a compassionate mentor, guide, or protector? There's space to write here. So if you have other questions you prefer to ask, you can jot them in here so you have them. And then it says some reflection questions, things to think about once they've chosen it. How does this image reflect your inner advocate? What words or phrases would feel comforting or empowering in difficult moments? And then it says encourage the client to give this voice a name to strengthen its presence. Now, in step 4, it's placing the inner critic and advocate in dialogue. So it says now place both cards side by side and facilitate a conversation between them. That, like the conversation we saw in the beginning of the chapter, we saw that conversation we saw an example of that. So now they're asking the client, or you, if you're doing this for yourself, to facilitate a conversation and have the client physically place the inner critic card in one spot and the inner advocate card in another. And if the client is comfortable doing so, they can move between the two, sitting in different chairs or switching positions to speak in each voice. Facilitated dialogue questions to the inner critic. What are you trying to protect me from? Where did you come from? So, like, if they can't think of what to say, you can have them ask the inner critic these questions. Where are you trying to protect me from? And then see what the inner critic says, right? Where did you come from? See what it says. Were you originally someone else's voice, a parent, a teacher, or a past experience? See what it says, and that kind of thing to kind of help prompt it along. Same thing with the inner advocate. Some questions to ask, and then encourage the client to speak as both voices, shifting perspectives between them, because you've already decided what the voice would sound like. You've already thought about what their names are and all of that thing. You have the image of what they look like. So you're going to try to use both, voices, both tones, so that you're really going back and forth between the voices. And if needed, they can write down each voice's responses instead of speaking it aloud. So that's an option as well. It says integrating the advocate's voice and rephrasing the inner dialogue. So it says reflecting on the exchange. How do you feel after hearing both voices? What surprised you about what the inner critic said? What does your body feel like after hearing from your inner advocate? Then you have turning down the volume of the inner critic. Ask the client to imagine dialing down the volume of the inner critic's voice. And then there's some questions here. If this critic's voice were a radio, what would it feel like to turn it down? And then what boundaries can you set when the voice becomes too dominant? Amplifying the inner advocate. Embodied integration and closing ritual. So it says to further integrate this work, guide the client in a somatic or ritual practice. And then it gives you some ideas of ritual or somatic practices, breath work and body awareness, how to do that, affirmation writing, how to do that. Release the critic's harshness. This is optional. And then a final reflection, some questions to ask. And that's your lesson plan or your workshop plan for your activity for the inner critic. So that's just one activity. So in this inner critic section, here's the next activity: rewriting the narrative, connecting with self-compassion. The next activity is creating a visual map of self-talk. The next activity is future visioning with the inner advocate. And it goes on. There's usually 4 or 5 activities, I think, per section. So you can work through them in order, or you can, jump around depending on what you need. Visualizing success with the advocate's help. And then it goes on to the next section. So this is another chapter, introduction. It's all activities and questions to ask, ways to work with a client or work with yourself. There's a few little drawings in here and a little bit of space to write in the writing sections here, you can see. But Other than that, it's all those activities and how to do it. So that's Tarot for the Soul, a collection of therapeutic activities, hot off the press from Drea Bloom, LCSW. Love Drea's work. So excited to have this. Thank you so much to Drea for sending this one out to me for review. I'm happy to have read it, and I definitely will be using some of these practices for myself. I think anybody, like she said, anybody in a helping profession could use something like this on their shelf just as a resource of things to do to help people if that's your job. So that's Tarot for the Soul. I will definitely put links to both of the books that I presented here today in the description box below. You can find them both on Amazon. Those links will be down below. So thanks for stopping by. And until I see you guys in July, stay safe and be blessed. Bye.